Assalamualaikum and a very good day to our respective panels. I am Siti Rashidah binti Kamil. I am from SRW655 and today I will be present my research project entitled Determinants of Motivation to Involve in Sport Among FSR Students in UiTM Shah Alam. This is the outline of the Chapter 1, Introduction. The researcher will talk about the background of the study, statement of the problems, and research objective. First, we're going to look on the background of the study. Generally, sport have numerous advantages for an individual. It can be in everyone's daily life, directly or indirectly. In addition, motivation is a major component that influences people's decision to engage in recreational activity and sport activity. The advantages of getting involved in sports are very good for body well-being and mental health. Besides, sport participation is most closely linked to a motivation. Motivation is a condition of intrinsic and extrinsic excitement that urge a person to take a certain activity. Intrinsically motivated people are inspired to participate in sports without the need for external motivation, while extrinsic drive is multifaceted and can range from fully external to totally internal. Motive to participate in sport also involve the concept of a motivation. A motivation is a refer to having no sense of purpose and lack intent to engage in particular behavior. Next, we're going to look on to statement of the problems. Motivation can influence someone's participation in sport due to many factors. Statistic from Goodhart, Stevens, Riley and Ball in 2018 stated that according to the data, roughly 2 million participants, which is representing 96% of the worldwide population, which more than a quarter of all individuals did not receive enough physical exercise in 2016. This puts almost 1.4 billion persons at risk of acquiring or aggravating illness connected to inactivity, and it must be treated as soon as possible. However, some results from previous researcher Houston mentioned that the participation motivation varied substantially in terms of success, physical health, skill growth, and activity factors. Other than that, despite the current situation of coronavirus disease, the COVID-19 pandemic increased the frequency of anxiety and mood illness in the general population. Quarantine also restricts many people, especially university students or athletes, from practicing their normal environment. There are two objectives for the research. Research objective 1 is to identify the motivation factors involvement in sport activities among FSR students in UiTM Shah Alam. And the second objective is to identify the differences between gender regarding motivation factors involvement in sport activities among FSR students at UiTM Shah Alam. Next, for Chapter 2, the researcher will talk about the theoretical framework and the research conceptual framework. The theory used for this study is self-determinant theory, SDT, which represents a broad framework for the study of human motivation and personality. So, self-determinant theory divided into three, which is intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation. Now we're going to look one by one. At the left end of the spectrum, which is in the red color, is a motivation, which an individual is completely non-autonomous, have no drive to speak of, and struggling to have any of their needs met. In the middle, we have several levels of extrinsic motivation. One step to the right of a motivation is external regulation in the green color, in which motivation is exclusively external and regulated by compliance, conformity, and external reward or punishment. The next level of extrinsic motivation is term introjected regulation, in which the motivation is somewhat external and driven by self-control, effort of protect of the ego, and internal rewards and also punishment. Next, in identify regulation, the motivation is somewhat internal and based on conscious value that to the individual. The final step of intrinsic motivation is integrated regulations, in which intrinsic sources and the desire to be self-aware are guiding an individual's behavior. Last but not least, the right end of the continuum in the blue color shows an individual entirely motivated by intrinsic sources. In intrinsic regulation, the individual is self-motivated and self-determined. It is driven by the interest, enjoyment, satisfaction. This is the research conceptual for this study, which motivation factors or determinants to involve in sport among FSR students. The motivation is the independent variable and sport participation is dependent variable. There are three dimensions in motivation, which is intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation. Intrinsic motivation can be towards stimulation when activity is performed to obtain experience. For extrinsic motivation, it is control motivation that characterize those activities that yield a specific outcome in terms of rewards or to avoid punishment. Last but not least is a motivation. Based from the previous researcher, a motivation represents a lack of any impetus for behavior. These are the outline presentation for chapter 3, methodology, where the researcher will talk about research design, sampling, instrumentation, data collection procedure, and data analysis. First of all, the research design. The research design for this study is quantitative method, which refer to descriptive research design. The quantitative method is used to find the answer of the objective. Why the researcher used descriptive study research? This is because, as I mentioned before, the purpose of this study is quantitative in nature. The research involved the collection of quantitative data of demographic and sport motivation scale. Next is sample. First, we're going to look at the population. The population of this study refers to UiTM Shah Alam enrolled in Faculty of Sports Science and Recreation. The criteria for this population is that the inclusion, all students registered in FSR Shah Alam, and the exclusion, all students in Shah Alam registered in faculties other than FSR. Next is number of sample. So according to UiTM Shah Alam Student Welfare Division in May 2021, the total number of students registered in FSR UiTM Shah Alam is 1,320 students. According to the table established by Kerajaan Morgan in 1970, the estimate sample needs to be taken from the students' population is 297 students. But then, 20% of samples need to be added to avoid any error or unwritten rates. So overall, the total sample for this study is 356 students. Let's move on to the sampling technique. In this research, the researcher will use the non-probability sampling, which refer to convenience sampling technique. The convenience sampling technique is used because it is a method where the selection of participation is based on their ready availability. The availability is usually in terms of geographical proximity, for example, known contacts or neighboring college. For instrumentation, the study have two variables, as I mentioned before, which is independent variable and dependent variable. In order to measure both of the IV and the DV, the researcher using sport motivation scale 28, which contains 28 items. Overall, the questionnaire consists of two parts, which is part A, demographic profile, and part B, sport motivation scale 28 questionnaire. In part A, there are 5 items that contains in demographic sections: gender, age, educational levels, types of sport activity involved such as water-based, land-based, air-based, and level of participation in sports such as schools, universities, states, and national are 5 items in the section A. Next, in section B, the sport motivation scales 28 is the questionnaire that represents 3 dimensions of motivation, which is intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation. This questionnaire is established by Lark, Pelletier, Michael Fortier, Robert, Valeron, Natalie, Barry, Kim, and Mark in 1995. The pilot study. The Chroma alpha is used as measure of variability of the test dimensions. The researcher had run variability analysis to measure the Chroma alpha values by each factor of the questionnaire, which is intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation. As you can see, the table above shows the result of the pilot studies. The first dimension is intrinsic. The Chroma alpha is 0.94. For extrinsic dimension is 0.88, and a motivation is 0.83. All 3 items show a high variability because the value of Chroma alpha above 0.6. In addition, both extrinsic and intrinsic have the same number of items in the questionnaire, which is 12 items, while a motivation have 4 numbers of items in the questionnaire. For data collection procedure, there are 5 steps that the researcher needs to follow to collect the data. First is the researcher have got the approval by the ethics committee. Second, researcher have seek approval from head of the organization, which is FSR. Thirdly, the researcher have to brief the respondent about the purpose of the study. Since now we are in the pandemic era and it's all online, so the researcher have done a short brief to the respondent by stated it online on Google Form link. Next step is to distribute the questionnaire to all respondents. And lastly, after all 356 respondents answered the questionnaire, the researcher have to collect the questionnaire after they have finished to answering it to analyze the data. Last but not least, for chapter 3 is data analysis. Data analysis is a process of systematically applying statistical and logical technique and to describe and evaluate the data. the first research objective to identify the motivation factors involvement in sport activities among FSR students at UiTM Shah Alam, the researchers have used descriptive statistics to see the highest mean among the dimensions. The second research objective, which to identify the differences between gender regarding motivation factors involvement in sport activities among FSR students at UiTM Shah Alam, the researchers have used independent t-tests. For Chapter 4, the researcher will talk about the findings and result of this study. These are the result of respondents' demographic profile. Female shows the higher frequency rather than male, which is as many as 209 respondents with 58.7%. Other than that, most of the respondents are average in 21 to 25 years old, which is 226 respondents with 63.5%. Next, degrees have the most high frequency of educational level of the respondents. There are 199 respondents enrolled in degree, which is represent 55.9%. Then, majority of the respondent is involved in land-based sport activities, which is 296 respondents that refer to 83.1%. Last but not least, most of the respondents participate in sport activities at university level with 40.0%, which is 145 respondents. Next is descriptive statistic. Descriptive statistic is related with the first research objective. Table above shows the mean and standard deviation of 3 domains for this study, which is intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation. Based on the researcher analysis, according to the table, it shows the overall result for motivation factors. In the table, the highest score level of motivation factors is intrinsic motive, showed a higher score of mean, which is 4.05 and standard deviation 0.88. The second highest motivational factors is extrinsic motivation with mean score of 3.88 and standard deviation of 0.72. A motivation have the lowest mean score of 3.06 and standard deviation 0.99. The result of inferential t-test to analyze the second objective, which is to identify the differences between gender regarding motivation factor involvement in sport activities among FSR students in UiTM Shah Alam. The researcher have used independent t-test because the distribution is normal, which is parametric. In addition, the sample is large enough, which is more than 30 respondents. The table shows the result of the analysis. The p-value of participation in sport activities is more than 0.05, which is 0.87. Male with mean of 3.68 and standard deviation of 0.57 reported had significantly higher participation in sport activities than female, which is mean 3.66 with standard deviation 0.70. Thus, there were no significant differences between gender regarding motivation factors involvement in sport activities. This concludes that it is failed to reject the null hypothesis. For Chapter 5, the researcher will talk about the discussion of the result and of the study. This part, the researcher will explain on the discussion regarding to the objective number 1. The researcher found that intrinsic motive is the highest motivation dimension that influences participation in activities. These studies are aligned with the previous finding by Kuchukubis and Gall in 2019, that it was determined that the motivation dimension of the students' participation in sport activities were mainly related to intrinsic motivation. Other than that, previous study by Memon Ali and Memon Ahmad and Farrell in 2018 also indicates that the respondents were more intrinsically motivated by the most common motives, such as feeling exciting when doing sport activities. In 2020, study from Fitri, Noven, and Dewi also showed a result that the intrinsic factor of sport participation on the high level. It really shows that the high intrinsic motivation factor in someone can lead them to participate in sport activities. For second objective, the results show there is no significant differences between gender regarding motivation factors involvement in sport activities. This finding is aligning with the previous study by Ahmed, Hamlah and Bataruna in 2020, indicate that male athletes in the sample involved in team sport participation had a greater approach than female. However, this study is contra or not similar to a study by Moradi, Bahrami and Dana in 2019 that indicate average of sport participation motivation in female athletes is higher than male athletes. As a conclusion, in the general, the results show that there is no significant differences between gender regarding motivation factor involvement in sport activities, as well as in male and female. It is clear that every factor of motivation, which is intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation influence participation in sport activities among persons. These are the references of my slides presentations. That's all from me. Thank you for your time. Have a great day and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.